I hid from my son that my monthly salary was $50,000, living modestly, so he had no idea. On Thanksgiving, he invited me to dinner with his wife's parents. I wanted to see how they would treat a poor man, pretending to be a bankrupt old man. You won't believe what happened as soon as I crossed their threshold. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. The tea kettle whistled as my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I set down the audit report I'd been reviewing and glanced at the screen. Seth, I picked up. So yeah, anyway, Dad? His voice came through mid-complaint, like I'd interrupted his real conversation. Beulah's parents want you to come for Thanksgiving dinner, at their place, Thursday at 6. I wrapped my fingers around the warm mug. That's kind of them. I'd be happy to come. A pause. Seth hadn't expected easy agreement. Right. Well, good. Through the phone, I heard the familiar sounds of my own house, the house I'd bought 23 years ago, the house where Seth and Beulah had lived rent-free for 8 years, while saving up. The television murmured in the background. Seth cleared his throat. So we found this house in Beaverton, he continued, his tone shifting to that particular flavor of stress I recognized. Perfect size, good neighborhood, $800,000. Problem is the down payment. We're short about $160,000. Banks these days, you know. I looked around my modest apartment. 1 bedroom, clean but sparse. Furniture from second-hand stores, strategically chosen. That's a significant amount. Yeah, well, Seth's voice carried a shrug. Not like you'd have that kind of cash lying around anyway. My jaw tightened. I said nothing. Then Beulah's voice cut through. Not meant for me, but loud enough. Just tell the old man we need money. Wait, never mind. He's probably living on Social Security or something. Seth didn't defend me. Didn't pause. So anyway, Dad, you'll come Thursday? 6 o'clock sharp? I closed my eyes briefly. Government Accountability Office. Senior Auditor. $50,000 monthly salary. Portfolio worth $2.3 million. The numbers ran through my mind like they did every time I reviewed my quarterly statements. 20 years ago, I'd made a choice. Raise Seth without the cushion of wealth. Let him build character. Learn self-reliance. Watch him become a man who earned his way. The irony burned. I'll be there, Seth. Should I bring anything? Just yourself. Don't worry about it. A pause, then. Actually, maybe don't park on the street. The Bakers have a nice neighborhood. Park around the corner or something. I opened my eyes, stared at my reflection in the darkened window overlooking Portland's downtown streets. The man looking back at me was 62, fit, methodical, a man who'd spent decades analyzing financial misconduct, finding patterns others missed. I won't be late, I said, my voice deliberately even. Thank you for inviting me? Yeah, bye. He hung up without waiting for response. I set the phone down carefully. The apartment settled into silence around me, the hum of the refrigerator, distant traffic, my own breathing. Strategic poverty, I'd called it once in my mind. This place cost me $900 a month when I could afford 10 times that. The used Camry in the parking garage instead of the Mercedes I'd considered, Goodwill suits and drugstore reading glasses, all so Seth would learn what it meant to work for something. I walked to the bookshelf and picked up a framed photo. Seth at 7, gap-toothed and grinning, holding up a certificate from his school spelling bee. Best dad, he'd written on the back in careful pencil. I remembered that day, how proud he'd been, how hard he'd worked on those words. When had that boy become the man who told me to park around the corner? I set the photo down and moved to my desk. Years of auditing had trained me for documentation. I opened my laptop, created a new file. Titled it simply Thanksgiving 2024. Date, November 18th, Monday evening, 7:43 p.m. Call from Seth Stewart. Duration, approximately 4 minutes. Content, Thanksgiving invitation. Request for $160K, indirect. Dismissive comments. I typed it all, fingers steady on the keys. What was said, what was implied, what I'd overheard. Beulah's voice, Seth's silence. The casual cruelty of assuming I had nothing because I appeared to have nothing. An audit always started with the initial evidence, the first anomaly that suggested deeper problems. This was my first entry. I saved the document and stood, walked to my closet and opened the door. The suits I wore to the office hung on the left. tailored, professional, appropriate for a GS-15 senior auditor. On the right, pushed to the back, the older clothes. The worn jacket I'd bought on sale 15 years ago. The shoes with heels that needed replacing. I needed to see the truth before deciding anything. Needed to know who my son had become when he thought his father had nothing to offer. My hand moved past the good suits, reached for the back of the rack. Thursday was 3 days away. I'd attend this dinner. I'd play the role they'd assigned me. The poor, embarrassing father who couldn't park on their nice street. And I'd watch, listen, document. Then I'd decide whether my son was worth saving. I pulled out the old jacket, held it up to the light. A small stain on the lapel I'd never quite gotten out. A button that didn't quite match the others where I'd replaced it. Perfect. I laid it across the chair in my bedroom and returned to the window. Portland's lights stretched below. Tiny lives in tiny apartments. Everyone carrying their own calculations of worth and dignity. My phone sat silent on the counter. The tea had gone cold. I thought about that 7-year-old boy with the spelling bee certificate. Wondered when he'd stopped seeing me and started seeing only what I appeared to lack. Thursday would answer that question. I opened my closet again and looked at the suits I never wore around Seth. Then I pushed them aside and reached for the back of the rack. The old jacket smelled faintly of mothballs. Monday morning light filtered through my apartment windows as I examined the fabric. Worn at the elbows, the color faded from charcoal to something closer to ash. I'd worn it to a budget committee meeting 9 years ago, back before my promotions, before the salary bumps that had built my portfolio into something substantial. It would do nicely. I hung it on the back of my desk chair and dressed in my usual work attire. 40 minutes later, I was in my Camry, deliberately driving the route that took me past my real house. The house stood in a quiet Portland suburb, modest by neighborhood standards, but solid. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, built in 1998. I'd bought it for $400,000. Current value pushed $650,000. The lawn needed mowing. Seth's Honda sat in the driveway next to Beulah's Lexus. My house. Their home. 8 years ago, newlywed Seth had called me. Dad, I know this is a lot to ask, but could Beulah and I stay at your place for a few months, just until we save up for our own house? I'd said yes immediately. Of course, son. Stay as long as you need. It's your home, too. We'll pay rent, obviously, he'd added. Don't worry about that. Save your money for your future. 8 years of saving. 8 years rent-free in a house worth more than $500,000. And still, they were $160,000 short. I drove on, mind working through the numbers like I worked through discrepancies in federal budget reports. Seth's job at the marketing firm paid $70,000 annually. Beulah managed a boutique fitness studio. Probably pulled in $50,000. Combined income of $10,000 monthly. 0 rent, 0 mortgage. 8 years meant $960,000 had flowed through their accounts. Where had it gone? The Lexus in my driveway probably answered part of that question. At the GAO office downtown, I settled into my familiar routine. Files spread across my desk. Contractor overcharges, grant misallocations, the endless creativity of people who thought they could hide money if they moved it fast enough. I'd built a career on following money that didn't want to be found. Roland, you heading out early for Thanksgiving? Marcus from the next cubicle leaned over the partition, coffee mug in hand, taking Thursday and Friday off. Dinner with my son's family. That's nice. Bet he's proud to have you visit. I glanced up. Marcus had met me 10 years ago when I joined this division, watched me rise through the ranks, seen the commendations, knew my reputation for thoroughness. He had no idea about the apartment, the Camry, the careful construction of poverty I maintained outside these walls. We'll see, I said, allowing myself a slight smile. That evening, back in my apartment, I pulled out an old leather wallet from my desk drawer. Inside, tucked behind expired insurance cards, I found what I was looking for. A photo from Seth's 8th birthday. He'd made me a card, construction paper, and marker. Best Dad, written in crayon, across the front. 20 years I'd kept this secret. 20 years of watching him build his own way, believing he was earning everything himself. I'd thought I was teaching him independence, self-reliance, the value of working without a safety net. Maybe I'd just taught him to look down on anyone he perceived as having less. I put the photo back, closed the drawer. Wednesday evening, my phone rang again. Seth, just confirming you're still coming tomorrow. 6 o'clock. The baker's place in West Lynn. I have the address, I said. I'll be there. And Dad? His voice shifted, uncomfortable. Maybe dress nicely? I mean, as nice as you can. I looked at the old suit laid across my chair. I'll wear my best suit, Seth. Right. Okay. See you tomorrow. The relief in his voice cut deeper than Beulah's overheard insult. After he hung up, I sat at my desk and added to my documentation file. November 20th, Wednesday, 8:17 p.m. Call from Seth Stewart. Content, confirmation of dinner attendance. Request to dress nicely as I can. Implied concern about my appearance in front of in-laws. I saved the file and moved to inspect my Camry in the parking garage. 15 years old, 180,000 miles, but meticulously maintained. The GAO parking lot held Audis and Teslas belonging to colleagues at my level. I drove a car worth maybe $3,000. The cognitive dissonance had stopped bothering me years ago. I cleaned the Camry's interior, checked the tire pressure, made sure nothing would draw attention. Not too shabby to be insulting, but clearly the vehicle of a man without resources. Tomorrow, I'd drive this car to a mansion in West Lynn, park it around the corner as instructed, and walk to dinner in my decade-old suit. And I'd watch my son. I'd memorized the pattern now, could recite it like case evidence. 7 years ago, the first dinner with the Bakers. Dwight had asked what I did for work. I'm an auditor with a government agency. Ah, public sector. He'd chuckled, shared a glance with his wife Patricia. Well, someone's got to do it. Must be rewarding in other ways. Patricia had smiled with practiced sympathy. Seth mentioned you live quite simply. Very admirable in this materialistic age. Seth had jumped in quickly. Dad's always been about minimalism, life philosophy, you know. Not a lie, but not the truth either. A reframing that let them all maintain their comfortable narrative. Poor Roland, making the best of his limited circumstances. So admirable how he doesn't let it bother him. I'd said nothing to correct them. Let the misunderstanding stand because I'd believed then that Seth knew better. That my son understood the difference between choosing simplicity and having simplicity forced upon you. But the years had clarified things, the casual dismissals, the apologetic tone when he mentioned me to friends, the way he'd started spacing out his visits to my apartment, like he was embarrassed to be seen entering a building without a doorman. Tomorrow would be the final test. Thursday morning, I dressed with the same precision I brought to audit preparation. The old suit, carefully pressed. The scuffed shoes, buffed to hide the worst wear. I looked at myself in the mirror, a man who appeared to be doing his best with limited means. The performance was complete. I locked the apartment door behind me and walked to my car. The baker's house was 40 minutes away in West Lynn, one of Portland's wealthier suburbs. Dwight had made his money in commercial real estate. Patricia's family had old money, the kind that predated Oregon's statehood. They'd built a house that announced their status from the street. By 7 o'clock tonight, I'd know whether my son was worth saving. The Camry's engine turned over smoothly. I backed out of my assigned space, drove through downtown toward the highway. Traffic was light. Everyone rushing toward their own Thanksgiving tables, their own family gatherings. I wondered how many of them were tests in disguise. The highway stretched before me, morning sun glinting off the hood of my ancient car. My phone sat silent in the cup holder. The suit felt scratchy against my neck. In my mind, I reviewed the framework I'd spent 40 years developing, the auditor's approach to uncovering truth. Establish the baseline, document the evidence, follow the pattern, draw conclusions only from facts, never assumptions. Tonight I'd gather the final data points. Then I'd know what kind of man my son had become. The neighborhoods transformed as I drove west. Modest apartments gave way to sprawling homes, then mansions with gates. West Lynn announced wealth from every corner, manicured lawns, luxury vehicles, streets named after trees that cost more to maintain than most people earned monthly. The Baker estate sat on a corner lot, imposing even by local standards. $2.5 million, I estimated from the footprint and location. Circular driveway, 3-car garage, European landscaping. A black Mercedes occupied the drive next to a pearl-white Lexus SUV. I parked my Camry on the street, 2 houses down, as Seth had suggested. In the rearview mirror, I straightened my worn tie. The store-bought pumpkin pie sat on the passenger seat. $7 at the supermarket. I picked it up and walked toward the house. A curtain moved in the front window. Someone watching. Seth appeared in the doorway before I reached it, his expression tight. "Dad, you made it." Traffic was light. I held up the pie. "I brought dessert." He glanced at the plastic container, then away. "That's, thoughtful. Come in." Dwight Baker filled the doorway behind Seth. 65, silver hair, expensive casual wear that probably cost more than my entire outfit. His smile was practiced, professional, the kind perfected over decades of sales. "Roland, come in, come in." His handshake was firm, territorial. "Still driving that old Toyota? They really do last forever, don't they? Japanese engineering. It serves its purpose." Patricia appeared beside her husband, blonde and polished, jewelry catching the light. "How practical. Seth says you've always been about practicality." Beulah stood behind them, her face rigid with something between embarrassment and contempt. "More like necessity, Mom." They ushered me into a living room that belonged in a magazine. Vaulted ceilings, contemporary furniture, artwork that looked original, everything positioned to impress. Dwight gestured to a leather chair in the corner, away from the main seating area. "Drink? I've got excellent scotch. Or maybe something simpler." "Water is fine? Water it is." He poured himself 3 fingers of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. "So, Roland, government work. You're at some agency downtown?" "The Government Accountability Office. I audit federal spending." Dwight laughed, a booming sound that demanded attention. "Ah, a bureaucrat. Well, someone has to do it, I suppose. The pay must be adequate?" "It meets my needs." Patricia settled onto the sofa, crossing her legs. "Such important work, I'm sure. Public service is so admirable when people don't have other options." I sipped my water, said nothing. Seth sat beside Beulah on the love seat, his posture rigid, avoiding my gaze. "Tell me," Dwight continued, swirling his scotch, "what happened? You must have had ambitions when you were younger. Plans for something more?" "I chose my path deliberately." "Interesting choice." His tone suggested otherwise. "I went the opposite direction. Started selling cars at 22, owned my first dealership at 30. Now I've got 3. $1 million revenue stream. Different philosophies, I suppose." Dinner was served in a dining room with a table that could seat 12. The meal was catered. Turkey carved by someone who wasn't Patricia. Sides and warming dishes. Wine that probably cost more per bottle than my monthly electric bill. They'd placed me at the far end, a cheap folding chair brought in to accommodate the extra guest. My store-bought pie sat on the sideboard, ignored beside an elaborate selection of professional desserts. Dwight dominated the conversation, gesturing with his fork, refilling his own glass repeatedly. "Just closed the deal on my 3rd dealership last month. Seth, you really should come work for me. Real money in automotive sales. Not like that tech stuff." "I'm doing okay in tech, Dwight." Patricia dabbed her lips with a linen napkin. "Better than some family examples, certainly." She glanced at me, her meaning clear. "Seth has always been capable," I said quietly. Beulah's fork clinked against her plate. "Capable, but held back. Some people inherit advantages. Seth had to build everything himself." The irony would have been funny if it weren't so painful. Seth had inherited a house, 8 years rent-free, every advantage I could provide without revealing my resources. And still, they believed this narrative. "Must be difficult," Patricia continued, "making ends meet on a government salary. Do you have savings? Retirement accounts?" "I'm adequately prepared." Dwight leaned forward, but not enough to help with major expenses, I'd imagine. "Seth mentioned you two found a house. 800,000. Beautiful area, Beaverton. You need what? 160 for the down payment?" Seth nodded. "Yes, sir. We're working on it." "What about family help?" Dwight turned to me. "Roland, can you contribute?" The moment crystallized. I felt Seth's eyes on me, waiting for me to confirm what he'd already told them, that I had nothing to offer. "That's a significant sum," I said. "That's what I thought." Dwight's smile was triumphant. "No offense, but government work doesn't exactly build wealth, does it? Can't squeeze blood from a stone." Seth sat silent. Not a word in my defense. Not even a token protest against Dwight's condescension. Beulah set down her wineglass. We've learned to be realistic about what's possible from different sources. Well then, Dwight stood, walked to Seth's chair, placed a hand on his shoulder. Tell you what, Patricia and I will provide the 160,000 down payment, gift from us. Can't have our daughter wait on forever for help that clearly isn't coming from elsewhere. Seth's face transformed. Dwight, that's incredibly generous. Thank you. Beulah rose to hug her father. Thank you, Daddy. This is why I'm grateful for real family support. Patricia beamed. Some families help their children succeed. That's what parents do when they're able. I watched my son accept another man as his benefactor. Watched him show more gratitude to Dwight in 30 seconds than he'd shown me in 8 years. The Camry insult, the parking instruction, the cheap chair at the end of the table, all of it I could have forgiven. But not this silence, not this acceptance of my humiliation without a single word of defense. That's very generous of you both, I said, my tone perfectly neutral. We moved through dessert, their elaborate pastries, not my pie. Conversation continued around me like I was furniture. Dwight's business successes, Patricia's charity board, Beulah's boutique studio expansion plans. Seth contributed enthusiastically, animated in ways I rarely saw anymore. At 9 o'clock, I stood. Thank you for the meal. I should be going. Dwight barely looked up. Early night? Well, long drive back to... Where are you living these days? Downtown. Small place. Cozy, I'm sure. Patricia's smile was dismissive. Good night, Roland. Seth rose halfway, then settled back. Bye, Dad. Not, let me walk you out. Not drive safely. Just a quick dismissal, eager to return to his real family. Goodbye, Seth. I paused at the doorway. Enjoy your new house. I walked to my Camry alone. No one accompanied me. No one watched from the window. I sat in the driver's seat, key in the ignition, but not turning it. My hands were steady, my breathing even. The auditor in me was already organizing the evening into categories, documenting evidence, building the case file. 8 years rent-free in my house. Tonight's complete betrayal. Dwight's hand on Seth's shoulder, claiming him. I started the engine and pulled away from the curb. In my rearview mirror, the Baker mansion blazed with light and laughter. I'd seen enough. The drive back took longer than usual. I stopped twice, once at a gas station just to sit in the fluorescent light, once at a park overlook where Portland's downtown glittered below. My mind was working, sorting, categorizing. Not anger. Something colder. I reached my apartment at 10:47. The building was quiet, most residents already asleep. I unlocked my door, set my keys in the bowl by the entrance, and moved directly to my desk. Documentation first, always. I opened my laptop and pulled up the file I'd started Monday. Added a new entry. November 21st, Thursday, 6:00 p.m., 9 p.m. Location, Baker Residence, West Lynn. Present, Dwight Baker, Patricia Baker, Seth Stewart, Beulah Stewart, Roland Stewart. I typed everything. Dwight's comments about my car, Patricia's questions about my finances, Beulah's contempt, Seth's silence, the down payment offer, Seth's gratitude, not to me, never to me, but to the man who'd spent the evening systematically diminishing everything I was. The words filled 3 pages. Clinical, precise. The way I'd write an audit report on financial malfeasance. When I finished, it was past midnight. I saved the document, backed it up to 3 separate drives, then sat back in my chair. 20 years of deliberately living beneath my means, teaching Seth independence. 8 years of free housing while he saved nothing. Tonight's complete betrayal. I pulled up my financial management software. Government Accountability Office salary. $50,000 monthly. 23 years at this level. 20 more before that at lower grades. Total career earnings over 40 years. Conservatively managed. Checking account. $127,000 savings accounts. 418,000 investment portfolio. 1,987,000 401k retirement. $845,000 total liquid assets. $307,000. The house where Seth lived, rent-free. $650,000 current value. Mortgage paid off 12 years ago. Total assets. $427,000. I stared at the numbers. $4 million my son thought didn't exist. $4 million that could have prevented tonight's humiliation with a single sentence. But I'd wanted to know who he really was. Now I did. Friday morning arrived with gray rain. I made coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and opened my laptop again. First search. Oregon inheritance law. Disinheritance children. The results were clear. Oregon allowed complete disinheritance. No requirement to leave anything to adult children. A properly executed will with explicit language would suffice. Second search. Oregon eviction law. Family members. More complex. 30 days notice minimum. Legal occupation for 8 years might create complications. I'd need an attorney. Third search. Transfer on death deed Oregon. Perfect. A TOD deed would transfer property ownership upon my death directly to named beneficiaries, bypassing probate. Could be revoked or changed anytime while I lived. Seth wouldn't inherit the house automatically. I could name anyone, any organization, any charity. He'd have nothing. I spent the afternoon organizing documents, property deed, tax records, financial statements. The 8 years of documentation showing Seth had lived rent-free, paying zero toward the mortgage, utilities, maintenance. His income tax returns I'd helped him file until 3 years ago, showing his substantial earnings. The rain intensified. I made lunch, barely tasted it, returned to my laptop. By evening I had the framework. Two-pronged approach, both legally sound. 1. New will, explicitly disinheriting Seth with clear language explaining why. Everything to charity, perhaps organizations supporting foster children or educational opportunities for underprivileged youth, kids who actually needed help, unlike my son who'd squandered 8 years of advantages. 2. Transfer on death deed for the house, also to charity, or perhaps sold with proceeds to charity. Seth would need to vacate within 30 days of my death, but first I needed him out while I was still alive. Saturday morning I dressed casually and drove past my house. Seth's Honda was in the driveway, Beulah's Lexus beside it, lights on in the kitchen. They were home, probably discussing their new house, celebrating Dwight's generosity. My house, my equity, my gift turned into a weapon against me. I drove back to my apartment and made a phone call to a colleague who'd gone through a messy divorce. Marcus, it's Roland. I need an attorney recommendation. Real estate and inheritance law. Everything okay? Just planning ahead. Someone thorough. Vernon Price. He handled my property settlement. Doesn't mess around. Want his number? I wrote it down, thanked him, and opened my email. Vernon Price's website was professional. 40 years experience, estate planning, property law, complex family situations, office in downtown Portland, walking distance from my apartment. I drafted the email carefully. Subject: consultation request. Estate planning and property matter. Mr. Price, I am seeking legal counsel regarding estate planning and a property matter involving family occupation. I am a 64-year-old federal employee with substantial assets and real property. I need to execute a comprehensive will, establish a transfer on death deed, and address the current occupation of my primary residence by family members. I have documentation prepared and am ready to proceed quickly. Please advise your availability for an initial consultation. Regards, Roland Stewart. I read it twice, checked for typos, and hit send. The email departed with a quiet sound. I sat back in my chair, coffee cooling beside me on the desk. Outside my window, Portland moved through its Saturday routine. People shopping, eating, living their ordinary lives. I'd spent 40 years building financial security, 20 years hiding it to teach my son independence, 8 years providing free housing while he saved nothing and learned to despise me for appearing to have nothing. Last night, he'd sat silent while another man paid for his future. This morning, I'd started the process of removing every advantage I'd ever given him. My phone sat quiet on the desk. Seth hadn't called, hadn't texted, probably didn't even think about how I'd gotten home, whether I was hurt, whether I'd eaten anything beyond the dinner I'd barely touched. I opened my financial software again, looked at the numbers one more time. $4 million. 40 years of careful planning. None of it would ever reach Seth. I pulled up the file with my documentation. 3 parts now, chronological, detailed, damning. Printed it, 3 copies. Put them in separate folders. One for my records, one for the attorney, one for backup. By noon, I'd organized everything an attorney would need. property deed, 8 years of utility bills showing sole ownership, tax returns, the complete financial picture. The plan was simple, legally airtight, morally justified. Seth had made his choice. Now I'd make mine. I closed my laptop and looked around my small apartment, the space I chose, the life I built, the resources I controlled. Monday, I'd likely hear from Vernon Price. We'd schedule a consultation. By next week, I'd have documents drafted. Seth could have his new house. Dwight's generous gift. The life he'd chosen with his real family. He just wouldn't have mine. The weekend passed in careful preparation. I gathered bank statements, property deeds, retirement account summaries, organized them chronologically, cross-referenced by account type. When Vernon Price's assistant called Monday afternoon with an appointment slot for Wednesday morning, I was ready. Wednesday arrived cold and clear. Vernon Price's office occupied 2 floors of a glass-fronted building near Pioneer Courthouse Square. Professional but not ostentatious. Leather chairs, organized shelving, the quiet efficiency of a place focused on substance over appearance. Vernon met me in the conference room. Mid-40s, graying at the temples, direct handshake. Mr. Stewart, thank you for coming in. I understand that you need estate planning assistance. I set my leather portfolio on the table and opened it. I need to disinherit my son, completely and permanently. Can Oregon law accomplish this? Yes, it can. Oregon doesn't require parents to leave anything to adult children. He sat across from me, pen ready. Tell me the situation. I removed my documentation. First, the handwritten notes from Thanksgiving, then bank statements showing my accounts, property deed for the house, current will leaving everything to Seth, retirement summaries. I arranged them in organized stacks between us. My son showed me who he is when he thought I had nothing. Now that I'm certain of his character, he'll receive nothing. Vernon read through my documentation methodically. Occasionally he made notes, asked clarifying questions. When he reached my financial summary, his eyebrows lifted slightly. You have substantial assets. The house alone is worth $650,000, paid off 12 years ago. My son has lived there rent-free for 8 years while accumulating 0 savings and learning to be embarrassed by me. I see. Vernon set the deed aside. And your liquid assets? $1.2 million in savings and investments. $800,000 in retirement accounts. I slid another document across. This shows his income over those 8 years. Combined with his wife's earnings, they should have saved over $1 million. They have nothing. Vernon nodded slowly. You want this airtight? No loopholes, no opportunities for reversal. He pulled out a legal pad and began outlining options. For the house, he explained 2 approaches: life estate or transfer on death deed. TOD was cleaner, faster, harder to challenge. Property would automatically transfer to my chosen beneficiary upon death, bypassing probate entirely. For liquid assets, a new will was straightforward. Name any beneficiary. Include explicit disinheritance language. Who receives your estate? Vernon asked. I'd considered this over the weekend. No family alternatives. I had no siblings. My parents long deceased. I want the money to go to children who actually need it. Kids from families without resources. The Portland Education Foundation provides scholarships to low-income students. Reputable, established. Perfect for estate gifts. That works. Children who have nothing will benefit from what my son took for granted. Vernon allowed himself a slight smile. There's a certain poetry to that choice. There's justice to it. He outlined the timeline. Draft new will, 1 week. Prepare TOD deed, 1 week. Notarization required with Joyce Hartman, a reputable notary in the building. Property appraisal recommended with Kevin Murphy, licensed appraiser. Total timeline, 2 weeks to complete all documents. Once executed, Vernon emphasized, these documents are extremely difficult to challenge. Your federal position proves competence, but I recommend additional documentation. Dates, conversations, reasons for disinheritance. Also, consider a cognitive assessment from your physician. Creates medical record of competence at signing. I nodded. My annual federal employee health assessments are current. All normal, no cognitive issues. Perfect. Bring those records to the signing. Over the next 2 weeks, I became intimately familiar with the process. Vernon sent drafts for review. I read each page carefully, my years of analyzing complex federal documents serving me well. I requested specific language changes, clarifications, additional provisions. The property appraisal required coordination. I called Seth on a Tuesday evening. Seth, I'm having the house appraised next Tuesday. The appraiser will need access. Appraised? Why? Insurance purposes. Routine property valuation. Will you be home? No, I'll be at work. Beulah might be here. This seems sudden. It's overdue. I'll coordinate with the appraiser. He'll be professional and quick. Okay, I guess that's fine. Kevin Murphy conducted the appraisal on schedule. I accompanied him. It was my property, after all. Seth wasn't home. Beulah had left for her studio. Walking through the house felt strange. Seth's furniture, Beulah's decorative choices, their lives built in my space without payment or appreciation. Kevin measured rooms, photographed features, noted improvements. The appraisal came back at $650,000, fair market value. By mid-December, all documents were ready. Vernon scheduled the signing for a Wednesday afternoon. Joyce Hartman's notary office occupied a corner of the law firm's second floor. Small desk, official seal mounted on the wall, filing cabinets of recorded documents. 2 witnesses, law firm staff, stood against the wall. Joyce reviewed my federal ID badge, verified my identity. She slid the new will across the desk. Mr. Stewart, I need to verify you understand these documents. This will revokes all prior wills and directs your entire estate to the Portland Education Foundation. Do you understand? Completely. And this deed transfers your property to the same foundation upon your death. Your son, currently residing there, is not a beneficiary. You understand this? I do. That's my intention. Very well. Please sign here, here, and initial here. I signed with deliberate strokes. The pen moved smoothly across the pages, then the TOD deed. Joyce applied her seal. The stamp made a definitive sound that echoed in the quiet room. She handed me the documents. These are now in effect. The TOD deed needs county recording. The next morning, I personally walked the recorded TOD deed to the Multnomah County Recording Office. I wanted to see it entered into public record myself. The clerk processed it efficiently, provided a stamped copy with the official recording number. I held the document, read the stamp. Real now, permanent, the house would never be Seth's. That afternoon, I returned to Vernon's office for our final meeting. All documents are executed and recorded, he confirmed. Your estate plan is now in effect. When do you plan to inform your son? Soon, after the holidays. I want him to enjoy one more Christmas, believing he's getting millions. Vernon leaned back in his chair. That's actually remarkably restrained. Most clients in your situation act immediately. I'm not acting from rage. I'm acting from certainty. A few more weeks won't change anything. He nodded. Call if you need anything. And, Mr. Stewart, you've done this correctly. The documentation is thorough. The legal foundation solid. I left his office carrying copies of every document. The originals were filed in Vernon's secure storage, with additional copies in my apartment safe. Christmas came and went. Seth sent a brief text. Generic holiday wishes. Nothing personal. No invitation to celebrate together. No acknowledgement of the Thanksgiving that had changed everything. I spent Christmas Day organizing my files, reviewing my documentation, preparing for what came next. By early January, I was ready. I texted Seth in early January. Brief, neutral. Need to speak with you. Coffee Wednesday afternoon, downtown caf, on 3rd. His response came hours later. Sure, what's this about? Better in person? Wednesday arrived gray with rain. I reached the caf. First, selected a corner table near the window. Ordered black coffee. Watched the street until Seth appeared, walking quickly. Shoulders hunched against the weather. He sat across from me, confusion evident. What's going on? You sounded serious. I sipped my coffee. Let the moment settle. I want to tell you about something I did 20 years ago. A decision about how to raise you. Seth frowned. Okay. When you were 15, I made approximately $200,000 annually as a senior federal auditor. I had a substantial investment portfolio, significant savings, real assets. I could have given you anything. Private schools, new car, college paid in full. His expression shifted, uncertain now. Instead, I chose to live modestly, let you believe we had limited resources. I wanted you to learn independence, self-reliance, the value of work. I set down my cup. I wanted to see who you'd become without the cushion of obvious wealth. Seth's face paled. What are you saying? I'm saying I currently have 1.2 million in savings and investments, 800,000 in retirement accounts. I own the house where you live, 650,000 paid off. Total assets approximately $4 million. The color drained completely from his face. You're joking. I'm telling you the truth I've hidden for 2 decades. The poverty you've been embarrassed by. Strategic. The modest apartment. The old car. The worn suits. Choices, not necessities. His hands gripped the table edge. Why would you? To see who you'd become. To understand your character when you thought I had nothing. I kept my voice level, professional. Thanksgiving showed me everything I needed to know. Thanksgiving? That was you accepting another man's money without defending your father. That was you sitting silent while the bakers systematically humiliated me. That was you telling me to park around the corner because my car was embarrassing. Seth's mouth opened, closed. I didn't. You did, and I documented it. Every word, every silence, every moment of betrayal. I removed an envelope from my jacket. 2 weeks ago, I completed new estate documents. A will disinheriting you completely. A transfer on death deed, removing you as beneficiary of the house. Everything goes to the Portland Education Foundation, scholarships for children from low-income families. I slid the envelope across. These are copies. The originals are executed, notarized, and recorded with Multnomah County. Legally binding. Seth stared at the envelope like it contained poison. You can't. I can. Oregon law allows complete disinheritance of adult children. Vernon Price, my attorney, ensured everything is legally airtight. You showed me who you are, Seth. Now you'll receive the inheritance you've earned. Nothing. His hand shook as he opened the envelope, scanned the documents. His face transformed. Shock, disbelief, dawning horror. This is because of Thanksgiving? Because I didn't defend you enough? That's insane. It's because of 8 years rent-free in my house. Because of every dismissive comment, every embarrassed glance, every moment you treated me like a failure. Thanksgiving wasn't the cause. It was the confirmation. Dad, please. I've lived in a $900 apartment while you enjoyed $650,000 of my equity. I've driven a 15-year-old Camry while you and Beulah accumulated nothing, despite combined income, exceeding $1 million over 8 years. You had every advantage and learned only contempt. Seth's breathing quickened. I didn't know. How could I know if you never told me? Your ignorance of my resources doesn't excuse your treatment of who you thought I was. You accepted Dwight's money over having any relationship with a father you believed was poor. That tells me everything about your values. I can change. You're 62 years old, Seth. I'm 32. The slip registered. Wrong generation. I was 64. Seth was 32. The stress was affecting my precision. You're 32, I corrected. Old enough to know better. Old enough to have shown basic respect, regardless of my perceived finances. He pushed back from the table, stood, sat again. His phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again. I need to... He answered it. Not now, Beulah. Her voice carried across the table, shrill and demanding. I couldn't make out words, but the tone was clear. Seth's expression crumbled. He just told me he's got $4 million. No, I didn't know. Of course I didn't. He listened, his face reddening. He already did it. Legal documents, recorded everything. Another pause. I don't know. Let me... She was screaming now. Actual screaming. Seth pulled the phone from his ear, wincing. I need to go home, he said finally. We need to talk about this. There's nothing to discuss. The documents are filed. My decision is final. Beulah's parents, Dwight knows lawyers. Let him hire them. Vernon Price specializes in estate law. Every document was prepared to withstand challenge. You can spend your savings on legal fees if you want. You'll lose. Seth stood, swaying slightly. How can you do this? I'm your son. And you showed me exactly what that means to you. I stood as well, straight in my coat. The house is mine. The money is mine. None of it was ever yours, despite 8 years of free living and a lifetime of expectations. You made your choices. Now, live with them. I left the cafe. While he was still standing there, the documents scattered across the table, his phone pressed to his ear and Beulah's voice cutting through the space between us. In my car, I sat for a moment before starting the engine. Across the street, through the cafe window, I could see Seth collapse back into his chair, head in his hands. I started the Camry and pulled into traffic. The first blow had landed. Now I'd wait to see how they'd respond. 10 days passed after the cafe meeting. I returned to my routine. Work, home, the quiet rhythm of my life. Seth called twice. I didn't answer. Then the certified letter arrived, requiring my signature. I knew what it was before I opened it. The postal worker waited while I signed the electronic pad. I thanked her, closed the door, and sat at my kitchen table. The envelope was thick, formal, bearing the letterhead of Harrison & Cole, a prominent Portland law firm known for aggressive litigation. I used a letter opener rather than tearing the envelope. Inside, 12 pages of legal filing. Seth Stewart, plaintiff, versus Roland Stewart, defendant. Contest of last will and testament. Claims of diminished capacity, undue influence, emotional instability evidenced by sudden disinheritance of only child. I photographed each page with my phone, then called Vernon Price. "They've filed," I said when he answered. "Expected? Can you come in tomorrow morning?" The next day, Vernon spread the filing across his conference table. He read it completely, occasionally making notes, his expression unimpressed. "This is a Hail Mary pass," he said finally. "They're hoping to intimidate you into settlement. Oregon law is clear. Competent adults can disinherit anyone for any reason. You have medical records, employment records, documented reasoning. This won't succeed, but it will take time and energy. Fight it completely." That's what I hoped you'd say. Let's bury them in documentation. Over the next week, I provided everything Vernon requested. Security clearance renewal from 6 months ago. Government background checks requiring psychological screening. Annual physical exam results. All normal, no cognitive decline. Performance reviews from the GAO. Consistently excellent ratings. Vernon compiled it into a fortress of evidence. Harrison & Cole is expensive, Vernon noted. Someone with resources is funding this. Dwight Baker, Seth's father-in-law. That explains the aggressive approach. They're used to buying outcomes. The letters started arriving the second week of February. Handwritten, Seth's familiar script on cream-colored stationery. The first one was 3 pages of rambling apology. Youthful foolishness, misunderstandings, promises to be better. The second referenced specific memories. Teaching him to ride a bike at age 7. That father wouldn't abandon his son now. I read each letter completely, filed them in a folder labeled Seth, February 2025. Didn't respond to any. I recognized manipulation when I saw it. Mid-February, my phone rang. Unknown number. Roland Stewart. Roland, Dwight Baker. Let's talk man-to-man, businessman to businessman. What's your number? I switched the phone to speaker, started recording. My number? Everyone has a price. You want to leave money to charity? Fine. Name the amount you want for yourself, and we'll settle this. This isn't about money, Mr. Baker. It's about character. Seth failed a test he didn't know he was taking. Dwight's voice hardened. Don't be naive. Everything's about money. You're just playing hard to get. 200,000? 3? You can't buy your way out of this. Goodbye. I hung up, saved the recording, emailed it to Vernon with a timestamp. The third call that week came from Beulah directly. First time she'd ever called me. Roland, it's Beulah. I'm calling because I think we all need to take a step back. We're family. Family shouldn't fight like this. We became strangers at Thanksgiving. This call doesn't change that. Her voice shifted, sweeter, almost pleading. I'm trying to apologize. Can we have dinner? Talk properly? Your apology is motivated by money, not remorse. The answer is no. You're being unreasonable. Seth is your only child. And he showed me exactly what that means to him. Goodbye, Beulah. I hung up. She called back immediately. I declined the call. She called 3 more times that evening. I blocked her number. Vernon filed our counter-motion in late February. The documentation was overwhelming. 40 years of federal employment, annual competency reviews, medical records, my written analysis of Seth's behavior from Thanksgiving onward, witness statements from colleagues about my professional capability. The estate planning process itself demonstrates competence, Vernon wrote in the filing. Mr. Stewart researched Oregon law, consulted legal professionals, made informed decisions over multiple weeks, executed documents properly. These are not the actions of someone with diminished capacity. The hearing was scheduled for late February. I dressed in my work suit, professional, appropriate for a senior federal auditor. Vernon met me outside the courtroom. Stay calm, answer questions directly, show them exactly who you are, he advised. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. Seth sat at the plaintiff's table with his attorney from Harrison and Cole, a woman in her 40s, expensive suit, practiced confidence. Beulah sat in the gallery behind them. Dwight wasn't present. The judge was a woman in her 60s, Judge Patricia Morrison, according to the nameplate. Seth's attorney presented first. Claimed Roland's sudden disinheritance indicated emotional disturbance. Argued no rational parent would cut off their only child without cause. Suggested I'd been influenced or coerced, though she couldn't identify by whom. Vernon countered with documentation. Passed my employment records to the judge. My security clearance renewal, requiring psychological screening, annual physicals, performance reviews, my handwritten notes from Thanksgiving, dated and detailed. Mr. Stewart is a senior federal auditor, Vernon stated. He passed a rigorous background check 6 months ago. He has documented his reasoning clearly. He planned this estate change methodically over months, consulting professionals, making informed decisions. This is textbook competence. Judge Morrison reviewed the materials, then looked at me. Mr. Stewart, you changed your will after 40 years. Can you explain this decision? I met her eyes, spoke clearly. Yes, Your Honor. I kept my financial status private to teach my son independence. At Thanksgiving, I learned how he treats people he believes have nothing. His character, when tested, was found wanting. This seems like a harsh response to a single dinner. It wasn't a single dinner, Your Honor. It was 8 years of taking without gratitude, culminating in one evening where he showed his true values. I documented everything. She studied me for a long moment. You appear quite competent to me, Mr. Stewart. Thank you. She reviewed Vernon's submissions again, then Seth's attorney's filings. The courtroom was silent except for rustling paper. Finally, she looked up. I've reviewed the evidence. Mr. Stewart is clearly competent. He has documented his reasoning. Oregon law permits disinheritance. The will stands as executed. Challenge dismissed. Seth's face crumbled. His attorney gathered her papers quickly, professionally masking her defeat. Beulah sat frozen in the gallery. Outside the courthouse, Seth called across the lobby. Dad, please, just talk to me. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. I paused for 1 second. Let him see me, hear him, acknowledge his presence. Then I continued walking. Vernon fell in beside me, creating a physical barrier. In my car, I sat for a moment before starting the engine. The legal challenge had failed. Dwight's money had bought them nothing but expensive legal fees and public documentation of Seth's failure. I drove back to my apartment. The victory felt appropriate, not celebratory. The system had confirmed what I knew. My decision was sound, my reasoning valid, my actions legal. But I knew they wouldn't stop completely. The will was secure now, court-tested and approved. That left one remaining asset, the house where Seth and Beulah lived, rent-free. I suspected that would be their next battlefield. I was ready. 3 weeks passed after the court victory. I returned to work, completed my quarterly audit reports, maintained my routine. Then on a Tuesday evening in late March, I called Vernon Price. I want to reclaim my house. Vernon was quiet for a moment. The property where Seth lives. The property I own, where Seth has lived without lease or payment for 8 years. Oregon law requires 60-day notice for no-cause termination of tenancy. You'll need to deliver written notice, document delivery, then file for eviction if he doesn't vacate voluntarily. Draft the notice. Vernon prepared the document that week. It was formal, legally precise. Notice to terminate tenancy. Effective. April 1st, Seth had 60 days to vacate the premises. No cause required under Oregon law. Property owner exercising rights. On April 1st, I drove to my house at 10 in the morning. Seth's Honda was gone. He'd be at work. Beulah's Lexus sat in the driveway. I knocked on my own front door. Beulah answered, confusion crossing her face. Roland? What are you? I'm delivering legal notice. I handed her the envelope. 60 days to vacate. You and Seth need to be out by June 1st. She stared at the envelope. Vacate? This is Seth's house. This is my house. I bought it 23 years ago. Paid it off 12 years ago. Seth has lived here rent-free by my permission, which I'm now withdrawing. Her face went white. You can't just kick us out. We have rights. You have 60 days. Read the notice. It explains everything. I turned to leave. You're making a mistake. Her voice rose. Dwight will fight this. I looked back. Dwight's money couldn't overturn the will. It won't stop a property owner from reclaiming his own house. June 1st. Be out. I walked to my car, photographed the house and my visit, noted the time and date. Documentation. Vernon filed the forcible entry and detainer action in mid-April, exactly as required when Seth and Beulah didn't respond to the notice. The court scheduled a hearing for mid-May. The hearing was procedural, quick. I presented the property deed showing sole ownership, showed documentation that Seth had never paid rent, had no lease, occupied by verbal permission only, presented the notice to vacate delivered April 1st. Seth's new attorney, different firm, less expensive than Harrison and Cole, argued that 8 years of occupancy created some form of tenancy right. Judge Reynolds rejected it immediately. No lease, no rent, no documentation of any rental agreement. This is permissive occupancy, which the owner can terminate. 60-day notice was proper. I'm ordering the tenants to vacate by June 1st or face forcible removal. Seth sat, rigid in his seat. Beulah wasn't present, probably couldn't face another courtroom defeat. Outside, Seth approached me in the parking lot. Where are we supposed to go? I unlocked my car door. That's not my concern. We can't afford first and last month's rent on a decent place, not with the down payment gone to Dwight's lawyers. You had 8 years of free housing to save money. You saved nothing. Those are your choices, Seth. Live with them. You're enjoying this? Watching us suffer? I met his eyes. I'm not enjoying it. I'm implementing it. There's a difference. I drove away. In my rearview mirror, Seth stood in the parking lot, defeated. The days crawled toward June 1st. I heard through indirect channels, a colleague knew someone who knew Beulah's sister, that they'd found a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a less desirable neighborhood. Rent $2,200 monthly. No down payment assistance from Dwight anymore. Apparently he'd tired of funding their legal losses. June 1st arrived on a Sunday. I drove to the house at noon. A moving truck sat in the driveway, nearly empty. Seth and Beulah were carrying the last boxes out. I parked on the street and waited. Let them see me watching. Let them understand this was real, final, enforced. The moving truck departed at 2. Seth's Honda followed it. Beulah's Lexus left minutes later. I waited another hour, then approached the house. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the house was empty except for scuff marks on the floors, nail holes in the walls, the ghost impressions of furniture on the carpet. They'd taken everything, left nothing. I walked through each room, the bedroom where Seth had slept for 8 years, the kitchen where Beulah had cooked meals in my house without appreciation, the living room where they'd built their life on my generosity while learning to despise me. In the master bedroom, I found a note on the floor. Seth's handwriting. You won. Are you happy now? Seth? I picked it up, read it twice, then put it in my pocket. I wasn't happy. Happiness wasn't the goal. Justice was the goal. Consequences were the goal. Teaching that free housing and inherited wealth weren't rights, but privileges that could be withdrawn. I locked all the doors, checked all the windows. The house was secure, empty, mine again. My phone buzzed. Text from Vernon. Confirm they're out. Property is yours. Well done. I stood on the front porch, keys in hand. 8 years of free housing ended with a court order. Seth had called it cruel. I called it consequences. Somewhere in Portland, Seth and Beulah were unpacking in whatever apartment they could afford on short notice. Dwight's money had dried up after 2 legal defeats. They'd have to manage on their own earnings now, pay their own rent, build their own security without a wealthy father-in-law or a generous father they'd learned too late to appreciate. I got in my car and drove back to my apartment. The house was mine again. The inheritance was secured. The legal battles were over. Seth had nothing left to take, nothing left to contest, nothing left to expect. I'd spent 20 years teaching him independence, 8 years giving him advantages, 3 months showing him consequences. The education was complete. 3 weeks passed after the eviction hearing. The June 1st deadline approached. I maintained my routine, waiting to see if Seth and Beulah would leave voluntarily or require sheriff enforcement. Then on a Tuesday evening in late May, my apartment buzzer rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. "Yes? Dad, it's me." Seth's voice came through the intercom, subdued. "Can I come up? Please. Just 10 minutes." I considered refusing, pressed the button instead. "Why?" "Because I need to talk to you. Face to face. Not through lawyers. Just us." I paused, then buzzed him up. Seth appeared at my door looking diminished. Worn clothing, tired eyes, shoulders curved inward. This wasn't the man from Thanksgiving. He stood in my doorway, not presuming entry. "You have 10 minutes." I stepped aside. He entered slowly, remained standing near the entrance. I crossed my arms, maintained distance. "We found an apartment," he began. $2,200 a month. It's small, but it's what we can afford now. Problem is, it's not ready until mid-June. We need 2 more weeks. You had 60 days. You chose to wait until the deadline approached. We were trying to find something better. Everything costs more than we expected. The legal fees from fighting you. He looked at his hands. They wiped out our savings. Those were your choices. Poor financial planning doesn't obligate me to extend deadlines. Seth nodded slowly. Dwight gave us $50,000, but he won't give more. He's furious about the court losses. He said you're too stubborn, and we're on our own now. I allowed myself a thin smile. He tried to buy a solution. When that failed, he withdrew support. Sounds familiar. Conditional assistance based on success. How does it feel being on the receiving end? Point taken. Seth's voice was quiet. What about Beulah? How's she handling this? His expression darkened. She blames me for everything. She says I should have known you had money, that I should have fixed this. She calls me a failure. Daily. Those are the same words she used about me at Thanksgiving. You said nothing then. Now you understand what silence costs. I do. Too late, but I do. We stood in silence. Outside my window, Portland's evening traffic hummed. Seth shifted his weight, exhausted. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said finally. I'm not asking you to change the will. I'm asking for 2 weeks. That's all. Just 14 more days. I gave you 8 years. That's 4,000. 176 days of free housing. You're asking for 14 more. The answer is no. Dad, please. The court order says June 1st. That deadline stands. Be out by then, or the sheriff enforces it. This conversation is over. Seth looked at me directly for the first time. I came here knowing you'd probably say no. I came anyway because I had to try. Not for the house or the money. I understand those are gone. Just to see if there's anything left between us worth saving. Thanksgiving answered that question. He nodded, moved toward the door. His hand rested on the knob. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Not about losing the money. About disappointing you. If you'd shown this awareness at Thanksgiving, none of this would have happened. I know, but I didn't. And now I'm living with it. Yes, you are. Goodbye, Seth. He left without another word. I stood at the closed door, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway. Then I walked to my window, watched him emerge onto the street below, get into his Honda. He sat there for a long moment before starting the engine. I closed the curtain. Over the next few days, I drove past the house, occasionally. Not stalking, verifying. I parked a block away, observed for 10 minutes, noted progress. Rental truck on Wednesday. Boxes loaded Thursday. Furniture carried out Friday. On May 30th, I watched from my car as Seth and Beulah made final trips. Beulah slammed the trunk repeatedly, her movements sharp with anger. Seth moved mechanically, carrying boxes without expression. They didn't see me watching. By evening, the truck was gone. May 31st, my phone buzzed. Text from Seth. We're out. House is empty. Keys are on kitchen counter. I typed a single word. Acknowledged. No response came. None was needed. June 1st arrived on Sunday. I drove to the house at noon, let myself in with my original key. The keys Seth mentioned lay on the kitchen counter, 2 copies, tagged with a hardware store label. I walked through empty rooms, scuff marks on floors, nail holes in walls, carpet indentations where furniture had stood for 8 years, the ghost architecture of their life in my space. In the master bedroom, I found something they'd missed, a small framed photo fallen behind where the dresser had been. Seth and Beulah on their wedding day 7 years ago, young, hopeful, certain of their future. I picked it up, studied it for a moment, then set it on the windowsill. Not my concern anymore. I locked all the doors, checked all the windows. The house was secure, empty, mine again. Outside, I stood on the porch, keys in hand. 8 years of occupation ended. Seth had texted compliance, moved out without sheriff enforcement, left quietly. The education was complete. The consequences delivered. The justice achieved. I got in my car and drove back to my apartment. Behind me, the house stood empty, waiting for whatever came next. Somewhere in Portland, Seth and Beulah unpacked in their cramped apartment, adjusted to paying rent, learned to live without advantages they'd taken for granted. That wasn't my concern either. I'd spent 20 years teaching Seth independence, 8 years giving him opportunities, 6 months showing him consequences. The lesson was over. Whether he learned from it was his choice now, not mine. I parked in my apartment garage, rode the elevator up, unlocked my door. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it. My space, my peace, my life undisturbed by people who'd learned to value wealth over character. I made dinner, ate at my small table, and felt something I hadn't felt since before Thanksgiving. Satisfied, not happy, not triumphant, just finished. The story had reached its natural conclusion. June passed into July. I returned to my full work routine at the GAO, completed the quarterly audits I'd been managing, prepared reports for congressional oversight. My colleagues noticed nothing different about me. I was the same senior auditor I'd been for decades. Methodical, thorough, reliable. The house stood empty through June while I consulted with a real estate agent. Market value had held steady at $650,000. I listed it in early July, and it sold within 3 weeks. Cash buyer, no complications. Closing costs netted me $640,000. I never visited the house again after June 1st. The agent handled everything: inspections, repairs, staging, showings. When the sale closed in late July, I signed documents in Vernon Price's office, accepted the check, and completed the transaction without seeing the property. The money transferred to my account. $640,000 that would never reach Seth. I decided weeks earlier where it would go. The Portland Education Foundation occupied a modest office building in the Pearl District. I scheduled a meeting with their director, Margaret Chen, for early August. "Mr. Stewart, thank you for coming in." She shook my hand warmly. "Your donation inquiry was intriguing." I'd outlined my intention in the initial email. Now I explained fully. I'm donating the proceeds from a property sale, $640,000. I want it used for college scholarships for students from low-income families. Full 4-year funding for as many students as the amount allows. Margaret's expression shifted from professional interest to genuine surprise. "That's remarkably generous. May I ask what inspired this?" "I believe in giving opportunities to young people who'll appreciate them. Students who understand the value of education because they've had to fight for it." She nodded slowly. "We could fund approximately 15 full scholarships with this amount, 4 years each, tuition, books, basic living expenses at Oregon public universities. 15 lives changed. That's sufficient." We worked through the details over the next hour. The foundation would manage the scholarship selection and distribution. My name would remain confidential. No publicity, no recognition. The scholarships would be awarded based purely on need and merit. "Would you like updates on the recipients?" Margaret asked. "Many donors enjoy seeing the impact." "No. I trust your judgment in selecting deserving students. Beyond that, I don't need to know." She studied me curiously. "This is unusual. Most major donors want involvement or acknowledgement." "I'm not most donors. The money has a purpose now. That's acknowledgement enough." I signed the donation paperwork, transferred the funds, and left with a simple receipt. $640,000, redirected from a son who'd wasted advantages to 15 students who'd earned them. The letter arrived 3 weeks later, formal acknowledgement from the foundation, 15 scholarships funded, names withheld per my request, but brief descriptions included: first-generation college students, foster care survivors, children of single parents working multiple jobs, young people who understood struggle and valued opportunity. I read the letter once, filed it in my desk drawer, and didn't look at it again. September brought routine. Work, home, the quiet rhythm I preferred. I heard nothing from Seth. No calls, no texts, no letters. The silence was mutual and appropriate. Through indirect channels, I learned fragments. A colleague's friend knew Beulah's sister. Seth and Beulah were in their small apartment, marriage strained but intact. Seth still worked his tech job. Beulah still managed her fitness studio. They paid their rent, managed their bills, lived without safety nets or wealthy benefactors. They were learning what independence actually meant. I felt no satisfaction hearing this, no triumph, just confirmation that consequences were real and being faced. One afternoon in late September, I sat at my desk reviewing audit reports when Marcus stopped by my cubicle. "Roland, you seem different lately. More settled, maybe." I looked up from my computer. "Do I?" "Yeah, can't put my finger on it. But whatever was bothering you last year seems resolved. Some situations required attention. They've been addressed." He nodded, understanding I wouldn't elaborate. "Good for you, man. Life's too short to carry burdens we don't need." After he left, I considered his observation. Was I different? Perhaps. I'd removed toxic relationships, enforced boundaries, ensured my resources would serve worthy purposes. The weight of disappointed expectations was gone. I returned to my audit report. Numbers aligned, expenditures tracked, federal funds properly accounted for. The work I'd done for 40 years, the work that gave my life structure and meaning. That evening I made dinner in my small kitchen, ate at my small table, watched the news briefly, then read financial journals until bedtime. The same routine I'd maintained for decades, but cleaner now. No calls from Seth asking for favors. No performance of poverty to teach lessons. No waiting for character development that never came. Just my life, lived on my terms, by my values. The story people would tell, if anyone told it, would be simple. An auditor, 64 years old, had made decisions about his estate. Those decisions were executed legally, upheld by courts, and resulted in charitable contributions benefiting deserving youth. Clean, professional, principled. The story Seth would tell, if he told it, would be different. But that narrative wasn't mine to control or concern myself with. I'd given him 20 years of hidden advantages, 8 years of free housing, multiple chances to demonstrate character. He'd shown me who he was. I'd responded accordingly. The scales were balanced, the accounts settled, the audit complete. October arrived with early rain. I walked to work when weather permitted, drove when it didn't, maintained my routine. The house was someone else's home now. My will was filed with Vernon Price, legally sound, court-tested. 15 students would begin college next fall with full funding. Everything I'd intended to accomplish was done. I closed my laptop one evening, having finished the day's work from home. Outside my window, Portland's lights sparkled in the damp darkness. Somewhere in this city, my son struggled with consequences he'd earned. Somewhere else, 15 young people prepared for opportunities they'd been given. I felt no need to know more than that. Tomorrow would bring more audits, more reports, more routine. That was exactly what I wanted. The story was over. The justice was done. The rest was simply living. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.